I'm going to begin a slightly slow process of getting introduced, getting the thing started by an introduction of myself. I'm John Holford. I'm at the University of Nottingham, where I'm a professor of adult education. And I suppose my reason for being here principally is that many years ago, I used to be a trade union educator. This is decades ago. And subsequently to that, or rather at the same time and subsequently, I wrote a book on the history of trade union education. And I guess that is the, why I was asked to sort of to start this off. I'm really going to I'm going to be chairing, but I'm also going to be saying something of a kind of historical kind. And I'm also going to be then introducing our three speakers, who are Kevin Rowan from the TUC, Teresa Donegan from Unison, and John Lloyd, who not quite away from the AEU, or possibly not even. Goodness, I'm out of date with my union affiliations. But we're going to be doing that. I should say that to everybody that we are recording this, and if you don't want to be recorded, I suppose you shouldn't be here. I suppose that's as crude as that, in a sense. Can I also just add that this exercise is organized clearly by the history and the trade union and industrial relations section of the History and Politics Network. I think I probably got its name wrong, but that's the gist of it. And we're very much trying to learn from history in order to inform the present here. We're very much aware of the various trends and contributions from history. So I think it's going to be quite an interesting session. I should say that one of the things we're trying to do is prepare for a conference which we hope to organize in the early part of next year, which we hope will be a sort of face-to-face conference. Face-to-face, really there, we will really be there and really talking to each other and meeting each other and so on. And so one of the things that we want to do today is not, as it were, how can I put this, not to solve all the problems, but to set them going, but to set up the agenda. And if you can bear that in mind in the contributions that you make, that would be very helpful. The way we're going to run the session this evening is that we're going to have the four speakers speaking for about 20 minutes each, hopefully a little bit less, and then we're going to have time for discussion at the end. There is one qualification to that, which is going to happen now, and that is we wanted to some colleagues wanted to say a few words in memory of Kevin Duffy, a trade union educator, and I think who's died quite recently, and I think Janet Farrer, the president of the University and College Union, is going to speak. Janet.
Thank you very much, John. Really appreciate you just kind of letting us have a couple of minutes just to remember Kevin, because he would absolutely have loved to be here and be involved in a discussion about the history and the future of trade union education. So yeah, as John said, my role is as president of UCU, but actually my day job is as a trade union educator at the Manchester College. And I had the pleasure of working with Kevin for a number of years. He was our course coordinator, and some of my colleagues from that college are here now. So I'm just going to borrow a couple of words from my dear friend Vicky Knight, who I don't think is able to join us, but she spoke at Kevin's funeral on behalf of us in TU Ed at the Manchester College. So I'm just going to borrow a few of her words. And she said that Kevin was a huge influence on the lives of so many, and his warmth, integrity, honesty and decency will be his lasting legacy. He articulated and reflected the essence of trade unionism, equality and social justice, and he embodied kindness, collectivism, encouragement and hope. He had an ability to deliver a person-centred ethic of care for people, the planet and our movement, staunchly defending trade union education as a gateway to improving lives and the potential of every single worker and every person. Kevin worked in a number of sectors, including construction, manufacturing and agriculture, before settling into his education role, to which he was dedicated for over 35 years. He was an activist in NUPE and then later within UCU. And he, although I'm part of that team, he led an award-winning team at the Manchester College, and we currently deliver, as I understand it, 75% of the trade union education within England. So Kevin will be really, really sadly missed, and for me and for colleagues who are here and those who, I'm sure lots of you knew him and came across him, he will be very present in the conversations that we're going to have. So thank you again, John, for giving the time for that.
Right, thank you very much, Janet. And it's very sad to lose a colleague like that. We're doing. I'm chairing it, and this is. Where's he gone? Okay, this is the single slide which I wanted to show to you, and which I hope I'm just going to work through, and I hope it will give a flavour of what seems to me to be important that's come out of the history of trade union education over the last century and more. And in a sense, we can go back to the beginnings of trade union education in sort of modern, in a vaguely a modern sense, which I guess we go back to the period of the before even the First World War, the formation of the WEA, the Workers' Educational Trade Union Committee, the National Council for Labour Colleges, the Labour College movement, the strike at Ruskin College, all that kind of history, which to those of you who have been involved will be well known, I should think. But one of the and that working then through into the growth of trade union education a little bit between the wars, working with the WEA and the Labour colleges, and then much more strongly after the Second World War, and particularly from the 1960s. A key theme which comes out of that, and which has been debated ad infinitum in the literature, is the one about what you might call independence or incorporation. This was the big dispute between, or can be seen as the big dispute between the WEA and the Labour colleges. The Labour colleges saying in effect to the WEA, if you take money from the state, you're going to act as the sort of lapdog of the capitalist state, and so on. Clearly, that's a position which although the Labour colleges kept to in theory until their demise, in practice they rode back from. But the trade unions, and particularly the TUC, from I don't know the post-war period, took a rather different view, and took the view, particularly from the 1970s, that money should be available from the state, and hence we had all the legislation about paid educational leave and so on. But also we had the grants from the Department of Education and Science, under the Labour government, and then subsequently under the Conservative government, to support trade union education. Clearly, there is a price in doing so, but I think, as the Labour colleges discovered, there's a price in not doing so as well. There clearly was an enormous the growth of trade union education with public support was very considerable, and whilst there was some degree of negotiation, giving way on the content of trade union education, there was a lot of achievement too. Second area, which is related to the first, is how far do you take advantage of the expertise and capacities of public sector educational bodies, whether these are colleges, universities, the WEA, etc., etc. One of the clear capacities of, for example, the TUC in its strongest period of provision or largest period of provision was the capacity to work with public bodies and to really take advantage of the great expertise that was developed by them. And there was a collective network of trade union educators across colleges, universities, the WEA and so on, as well as trade unions, which contributed to a much bigger and more vibrant world of trade union education. There is the loss of those bodies, I think, has been a great loss to trade union education, and I'd probably say that particularly in the way that the universities are bailed out of this and so on. The third question of relations with employers. How can unions persuade employers to improve training? What is the role of employers in trade union education? I came into trade union education in the late 1970s, and at that stage, the line from the TUC was, under no circumstances should employers have any role in trade union education. But clearly there were other positions, and clearly now one of the things that unions are very energetically engaged is the need to argue for the improvement of training across the board, not merely education for union activists, but education in skills and so on. There's the whole dimension of whether, in fact, trade union education should focus on representatives, shop stewards, health and safety reps, and so on, or whether it should be about educating members. You can crudely settle that as to whether it's about collective or individual improvement, getting people better careers opportunities as individuals, or making the union or indeed the political system and historically the labor movement work better and change the society for the better. There's a whole bundle of questions around the role of the TUC in relation to affiliated unions, and clearly this has shifted a great deal over time, depending on the relative strength and capacity of the TUC and the affiliated unions, their size, their ability to develop educational opportunities for themselves, different perspectives that they have had in the different organizations. I think I would just throw in that clearly there are opportunities which arise from the sort of efficiency and coordination that a central organization can offer. And there's also the old argument about bringing members together from different unions. I mean, this is an anecdote, but of course there were often, that business of getting people from one union or industry to recognize that different unions and different industries worked in different ways. Whether that is quite the same in the current world of large general unions is another matter, but I think we need to throw that in. There's a dimension or a set of issues around the content of the curriculum, and this clearly plays out differently according to whether it's for union reps or for members. And for reps, one of the key issues which was debated ad nauseam in the, I don't know, the 70s, 80s, was the question of whether we focus on sort of issues of political economy, you know, why the world is the way it is and how capitalism works and that kind of stuff, as against bargaining skills, organizational skills, and so forth. And that was, you know, it's a tension that is always there. There's the question of what if unions are offering education for members, what is it that they should be offering? Should there be particular, should it be about work-related skills, or should it be much broader issues of changing society and so on? And finally, and I hope as a result of this I shall just about manage to keep to my time, there have been endless debates about pedagogies. I mean, to begin with, there was, I guess, trade union educators, even back between the wars and before that, realized that you can't just, as it were, lecture to trade unionists. You need to engage with them, to involve them in all kinds of activities that people learn actively, that people learn by doing, and all that kind of stuff. There were then debates about the extent to which things should be student-centered, and that was a debate which I remember being very fierce in the 70s and 80s. There is a whole, in a sense, what lies behind, one of the things that lies behind this is the role of participation and voice, I suggest, but at some level, the question of how far is it essential that union education is a democratic exercise. You know, unions are democratic. They're about democracy in society. Do we think that that democracy in the learning process is really necessary or essential? That's a tension because, of course, as with any as Boris Johnson may be learning at the moment, democracy is difficult and messy and not always to your advantage, to the advantage of the organizers. Look, I think that's what I wanted to say by way of kicking things off. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who I hope I'm going to lose my sharing. I'm going to hand over to Kevin, who is going to tell us what he's going to tell us.
Thanks very much indeed, John. Thanks for the reminder not to use PowerPoint for these meetings. Thanks very much for the invitation. It's genuine pleasure to see lots of old comrades on the screen. I won't name them all because far too many. And I'll just maybe start by thanking Janet for that those words about Kevin. Really, important to kind of share those thoughts, but also a reminder for me about how important it is to relate trade union education to the real world. And Kevin's kind of experience in a variety of workplaces was no doubt critical in what he brought to kind of trade union education. I did want to give a particular shout out. I think I saw Janet Newsom on one of the screens, and only because I'm reminded that 39 years ago in November, Janet ran a TAS Trade Union Education for Young Workers session. One of the products of that was me becoming a shop steward in the shipyard all those years ago. So if no one likes what I've got to say in the next 15 minutes or so, then Janet Newsom is to blame. So thanks, Janet, for that. I'm really going to focus on how kind of trade union education helps us to be effective trade unions. I think, colleagues with, great kind of distinguished careers in trade union history know much more about how important trade union education has been through our trade union history. And I'm not going to, say too much about that other than, throughout all of kind of trade union labor movement history, trade union education has been absolutely integral to the progress that we've made. And if you look at, the kind of challenges we're facing now, which I'm about to talk about, trade union education is going to be a really kind of critical part of our part of the way in which we enable trade unions and the trade union movement to progress as best as it can be, as it's able to. It is as important now as it was. I think you talked about 1905, John, when WA was formed, and trade union education is as important now as it was then. And I think, I see John Edmonds on the call. John will tell you about the trade union education being important for the political and industrial moments he challenged. I think if we were to, to look back at the, yeah, sorry about that, Janet. I think if we look at Frances O'Grady, announced her retirement when Frances took up her post just about 10 years ago. Who knows that she'd have been facing the challenges of the return of an increasingly volatile right-wing, Tory-led administration, Brexit, and a global pandemic. You never know what hands you're going to be dealt in the trade union movement. So importantly, having a trade union education service and system that is flexible and responsive is really, really important. And I guess the challenges that we're facing now are really, in many ways no different to challenges we faced before, but in some respects they are different. I think we're seeing an increasingly active trade union movement when it comes to kind of industrial campaigns and industrial action, much more willing, I think, to bring the argument of our strength to the conversations that we're having with employers, rather than just the strength of our argument, informed by increasingly desperate economic factors, increasingly financially squeezed membership, but also I think a deliberate strategy from some of our union leaders, more newly elected union leaders, to be on the front foot in saying what happens in the workplace is what matters for trade unions, and what happens politically is less important. And that's led to, I think, a much more, interesting, in many ways, much more volatile industrial set of relations that are informing how our unions behave. So I'm going to talk about the context of trade union education in that wider kind of economic and political sphere. I guess starting point as well, though, and it's difficult to be precise, but our own estimates and what unions tell us would indicate that we've got around somewhere in the region of 120 to 150,000 active workplace reps in the UK today. That's much fewer than it's been, but it's still a pretty significant cohort of union reps that are busy every day working for the members that they represent. And for those without calculators handy, that's about one rep for about every 50 trade union members. Now that isn't data that stands rigorous scrutiny. It's largely anecdotal and extrapolation from what unions tell us, but it's not a bad estimate. And we also know that most reps actually participate in some form of trade union education. Probably a high percentage of new reps get access to training pretty quick, but actually through the course of their career, around about 1 in 3 union reps every year participates in some form of trade union education. So it's still, it's a service, if you like. It's a resource that's really well used by the current kind of cohort of union reps. We also know that the demographic profile of our rep space is not where we'd want it to be. In some respects, it looks a lot like me. Kind of aging white man in a reasonably secure employment without any kind of protected characteristics. That's what our rep space look at. 90% of our reps fall into that cohort, between 45 and 55 years of age, in a reasonably secure employment, and reasonably full-time employment as well, I might add. The rest of the workplace doesn't look like that, and the rest of our trade union membership actually doesn't look like that. And that's an important thing to bear in mind. We're going to be talking about a little bit later, because any of us who have the privilege to work in the trade union movement or be active in the trade union movement really appreciates how important that rep base is. For the vast majority of trade union members, the workplace rep is the union. You know, it's not the general secretary, it's not the person they see on telly. The person who they see every day, who they go to for advice and guidance, for support, for information, for representation, is that workplace rep. So one of our key challenges is to make sure that we're supporting those reps to be able to have the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence to be able to respond to those demands and challenges that they face every day. For me, that's the absolute mission of trade union education. So your kind of questions there, John, are, is this political? Is it utilitarian? It's probably all of those things. And our trade union education service has got to be able to respond to those challenges that those reps face every day. That's at the root of trade union organisation. I'm probably stealing Teresa's thunder because I know that's what Unison College is principally going to drive as well, but I go first, so I get to steal Teresa's thunder. We also know, and this is, I think, where there are some quite difficult structural challenges for us as a trade union education service. We also know that there's a very real, very tangible shift from classroom-based education delivered through our FE partners and Janet's members largely to a much more hybrid and digital form of learning engagement. Our reps are saying to us very, very clearly that they want to be able to access the information and support that they want and they need to respond to those challenges when they want, wherever they want, and without having to wait for a course to be put on one of the few FE colleges that we're managing to kind of keep providing trade union education in that way. Now, there are very real challenges for us in that dilemma, but also very real and valuable opportunities. The most obvious challenge that we keep playing back to unions is use it or lose it. Now, we've seen classroom-based education experience year-on-year decline for the last 20 years. This isn't something that's been, as a result of the pandemic. Certainly that, forced classroom-based provision off the cliff, but classroom-based trade union education provision has been in decline for 20 years. There are a lot of reasons for that. Most evident one is membership decline and workplace organisation decline. Recognition agreement, collective bargaining cover increasingly small part of the economy. Trade union membership clearly is significantly smaller than it used to be, although I'm pleased to say, with the exception of a slight blip this year, we've seen trade union membership starting to creep up again. But quite simply, the cohort of new reps is much, much smaller year on year. Secondly, most of our reps are in the public sector. The last 20 years have seen a persistent squeeze on the public sector, and it's more difficult for reps to secure time off for training. And while there have been a very kind of notable but very few examples of challenge to employers who are reluctant to give people time off to train, the reality is that workers actually are less and less inclined to even apply for it, partly because they're under pressure in the workplace. They don't want to leave busy colleagues to kind of pick up the workload. They're just less inclined to want to take time off to do those 10 days and often 5-day bits of training. And they just feel guilty, I think, about leaving colleagues behind to pick up their workload, and that's not understandable. We've all seen the pressure that our public services are under, and our reps working in public services feel that as much as anywhere else. But nor are trade unions or trade union members or trade union activists immune from very apparent social trends. If something's happening in the world, there's probably an app for it, and that's certainly the case in trade union education too. The shift from classroom-based provision to online provision, hybrid provision, has of course been accepted by the pandemic, but it was happening anyway. Our unions tell us that they absolutely want to maintain classroom-based, FE-based provision, and so do we as a TUC. But our reps are voting with their feet, and that's the reality of it. So we have to respond to that reality. We are determined to keep FE-based provision. We've just signed a whole new suite of partnership agreements with colleges who are providing FE provision for us. We just restored and refreshed a whole suite of materials with our colleges, and it's really positive that we're doing that. but we can't ignore the fact that our members also want to learn in a much more flexible, much more online, much more accessible way of learning. And there are advantages to that. We know that when someone becomes a rep, the first 4 to 8 weeks are the most critical. If we don't, and most unions have got systems in place to reach those reps and give them that kind of initial support and initial training in place within a few weeks of them becoming a rep. And it really matters, because if a new rep doesn't find that kind of support very quickly, they're much less likely to be a rep in 10 weeks than reps who do get that support. If they, for all kinds of reasons, take up the role of responsibility of being a rep, and it's really great that they do, but if they're isolated, if they don't know who to ask for what, if they don't get kind of the support, they very quickly find that that's a job they don't want to do, because if you don't get that support, it's a really difficult job to do in the workplace. And digital simply has a greater and quicker reach and access. I've worked in trade union education, as Tom knows. I remember, a number of times having to ring round the 4 reps that had booked onto a stage 1 course and saying, I'm really sorry, but you're not coming to the course next week because we've only got you 4. And we might be able to get you in the next course in the following term. And that's really disappointing when you're a trade union tutor looking forward to the course, but it's also really disappointing if you're a rep waiting to go on that course. Leaving those reps hanging is a really kind of disappointing experience that we've all probably shared, those of us who've been involved in trade union education.
5 minutes, Kevin.
Sorry?
5 minutes.
All right, thanks, John. Yeah, I'll be all right. And also the evidence shows that the demographics for participation in online is much better than the demographics in FE provision. Now, there's been some progress actually in classroom-based provision in terms of the diversity of reps, but online provision, clearly we get more women and we get more young people participating in online programs. So if you're juggling caring responsibilities, 2 jobs and trade union education, then the one bit that's most flexible in that is trade union education. So online provision really does allow us to be much more flexible. And content design is much more flexible too. Those of us who've worked in FE and understand that it's very difficult to get curriculum changes. It takes a long time, but if you're working online, it can be different. And if we wanted to do, as we have done, very quick provision that responds to the workplace changes, then we're able to do that much more flexibly with digital provision than we are with classroom-based provision. No one saw the pandemic coming, but understanding the health and safety challenges needed to be done quickly, and we did that. The pandemic exposed real challenges around the provision of sick pay. Equipping our reps with the knowledge and understanding of how sick pay schemes worked and how to campaign for them was something we needed to do quickly. We did that. Understanding furlough and associated employment rights. No one thought we were going to have to answer those questions, but we were, and we did that really quickly, and we did it online, getting 1,200 reps on a webinar to hear from experts about what does a COVID risk assessment look like, is something that we could do really, really quickly, and we could only do that digitally. So responding to that new mood of confidence for industrial action in the movement is our next challenge. For most reps, as it was for me, when you take industrial action, it's probably the first time you've done it and likely to be the only time you've done it. Equipping our reps with, what's the law on picketing? How do you communicate with communities when you're on strike? How do you build community support for your industrial action? And all things that we need to respond to quickly, and we can do that digitally. Now, these are all part of the TUC education offer, aligning our trade union education service to those big organising challenges. But to finish, John, because I know you're going to kind of pull me up on time in a minute, I don't want to sound like a messiah for digital. I'm not. I think it delivers some really good things, but there's some things that it doesn't deliver. And I think you spoke to this earlier, John. Being in a room with people with the same experiences of you, who face the same challenges as you, is a really powerful way to build not just education and learning, but a really powerful way to build solidarity. And I don't think we can do that as well online. If we're going to change the demographics of our rep space, which we need to, then enabling our our women activists to become women leaders and building the solidarity that they need, I don't think you can do online. Reaching our Black activists and Black reps and enabling them to share solidarity with other Black reps and Black activists is something I don't think you can do online. And admittedly, I'm saying that as a 56-year-old person who's not bought into online networking. If I was to ask my 22-year-old, he might have a different story on it. But our reps aren't all 22, they are the same age as me. So how do we enable them to access that trade union education online, but also get the benefits from solidarity with other trade union reps? They're big challenges for us. And our reps, you know, they want to learn, they want to be educated, but most importantly, they want to know how to do their job in the workplace. And the best people to tell them that are putting them, the best way to help them understand that is putting them in a room with other reps who've understood and faced those challenges. I've run out of time, John. There's lots more to say. I hope we can pick some of these things up in question, but thank you very much for the opportunity, and I hope that's a helpful discussion starter. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Kevin. That's really helpful, really strong contribution, I think, from about the current situation and how we got there. We now turn to Teresa, who I've lost on. Oh yes, there you are, Teresa.
Yes,
Teresa's going to be telling us about work in Unison, and particularly the Unison College. Teresa, over to you. And again, I will give you a 5-minute warning when there's, you know, so and apologies for being rude when I do.
Not at all. So we have 1.3 million members, 76% female. I think I've got up to 55% earn £20,000 a year or less. Many of them part-time and term-time workers, but within that, a significant number will be full-time employers. I think that shows the shocking state of pay across public services. This situation has obviously been exacerbated by the fact that for years our members have had below inflation or no pay rises at all. Now, when you think about the cost of education for many of our members, the fact that they're on such low pay has locked them out of the opportunities to access education, especially where there's fees applied. So for us, being able to provide a member learning programme that can support many of our low paid members get opportunities to enhance their personal lives, their working lives, and generally their life chances is very important. Our membership in terms of age, well, you can see up there on the screen, 27% of members are under the age of 40, 55% are age 40 to 59, and we have 14% that are over the age of 60. Our membership profile there reflects very much the demographics of public sector workers, which probably most of you will know is predominantly women, has a higher representation of Black and ethnic minority and migrant workers, and so on. So this next slide, which hopefully it will move on to. Has that moved on? Thank you. What this shows is where our public services are, where our members are. Primarily, they're based in those service groups that are listed there from local authorities, the NHS, etc. We have 40,000 employers that our members are organised in. And our members are spread across 160,000 workplaces. So it is such a massive task. And I know many of the other large unions also face consequences like that and difficulties. It is true to say that a significant number of our members are based in 1,500 of those 40,000 employers. But nonetheless, when we look at the level of our activist base, I think it will demonstrate the challenges that we face and indeed other unions face in terms of the low level of activists. I think you can probably imagine the complexity and the challenges that Unison faces in organising and supporting members across such a vast number of employers. And the knowledge and the skill set that our activists and indeed Unison officials need nowadays compared to, say, 10 years ago has changed significantly. And one of the cornerstones of the Unison College, even though I won't labour the points on this, it will be about making sure that we provide to our reps the knowledge and skills that they need to be confident in doing the role that they do. So, is that moved on? Yeah. Okay. So I think I also just need to put into a context, where were we in 2019, early 2020, before the pandemic hit? Because I think where we were actually has helped shape why we're doing the Unison College. We did a number of surveys. We're always surveying Unison, our school surveys, our Women Deserve Better. And we in Learning and Organising did this survey. It was called Skills for the Future. And what this turned up was that for many public sector workers, and we had over 38,000 responses, many of them felt very insecure in their job prospects. Sorry, just lost my notes. They felt very insecure in their job prospects. 57% of them were felt that their jobs were at risk. 34% of them feared had a fear of being made redundant in the next 3 years, and 65% had experienced organisational change in the preceding 3 years, and 22% had experienced new technology impacting on their jobs. 45% of them had seen a reduction in the number of people that were doing the same work with them. So what I'm doing here is painting a landscape where public sector workers who had suffered from considerable lack of investment over a decade or more in their education and their training needs because of the agenda like austerity and the cuts that we had to bear across public services, were feeling very, very vulnerable. But that being said, 80% of these members had undertaken training in the preceding years, and 70% had been for work or career. And what this training in the main turned out to be was the kind of mandatory DSE training. A lot have done that kind of training, but 66% of the training that they had undertaken had been done online. So Kevin, I recognise what you said about training, not just for activists, this also applies for members. So just very quickly, other things that came out of that survey was that 82% of respondents said that they were ready to learn new skills to remain employable in the future. Because I think I need to put this in the context that apart from austerity, digitization, the automation of services has had a massive impact on public services over the last decade. So 82% of our members felt ready to learn new skills to stay employable in the future. We also found that sadly there was many skills deficiencies: computers, digital skills, management supervisory, and sadly numeracy and literacy still remain a problem for members in public services. And again, if you look at the nature of the jobs in public sector, many of them are not just low paid, they're considerably undervalued, but some of them are also what would be classed as low skilled. Sorry, that's nothing to do with me, that interruption.
I think has got there. Could we mute everybody except Teresa?
Okay, thank you. So it's probably none of these up here on the slide are any shock, and that the kind of barriers to time to learning or accessing learning for members was time, work, as well as personal. And bear in mind the profile and the demographics of our membership. It's not unusual for many of our members to have 2 jobs, to do shift work and so on. Quite high up there was that members felt that they did not get the support from employer, and that was a number of reasons fell under this category, not just about not receiving paid time off. A number of members felt that employers would be openly hostile if they went off to seek education and training development. Cost was also a big factor, and I think again looking at the range of members that we cover, low pay is an issue. It deters people from being able to access education. It locks them out of those kind of opportunities. And of course, for our members, 13% felt that they lacked the skills or had the confidence to undertake training. I should also say that is also applicable to answers we've had when reps answer similar surveys. There are levels of reps that don't feel confident to attend training. And I think when we talk about the amazing opportunities that being able to deliver courses virtually and people being more engaged and active, I think none of us here will forget that there are many individuals that may be excluded from participating. So, you know, I'm one of those advocates. I do think we need to take advantage of digital and virtual training, but equally, we need to ensure that we can accommodate learners that need to learn in different ways, i.e. classroom provision.
5 minutes, Teresa.
Oh my God, that time went quick. I think I should have a few more minutes extra, John, because of my difficulties getting my PowerPoint up. Anyway, I think if you take on board that context and the background I've just described of where our members were, you can imagine things, you know, obviously got a bit difficult during the pandemic for many of our members. So when Christina McAnee was elected as Unison General Secretary, she came into post at one of the most challenging and difficult times our members in public services had ever faced, as along with millions of other workers, I accept that. The public service workers were required to adapt and to change, showing great resilience and creativity during the pandemic in how, I know we all know about what the frontline workers and the difficulties they went through, but behind the scenes were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of other public sector workers. Many of them adapted their role, took on different roles in order to continue to deliver public services across the United Kingdom. And we all know the pandemic has accelerated change in workplaces. So when Christina came in, these up here on the statements are her statements from a manifesto. She'd recognised that Unison members had faced years of attacks on their pay and working conditions, needless austerity, cuts to public sector, and the pandemic have led to unprecedented changes. She also then went on to say that in her manifesto, she pledged to establish a Unison College to support all members develop that will be built on Unison's values, helping to build organisation, membership and activists, providing new and expanded learning opportunities for all Unison members, bringing together learning of all kind. So these are the three overarching principles that the college is covering. Because you can imagine, we did a huge review. We took stock of everything we did, how we did it, when we did it, and why we did it. The review took us 7 or 8 months, and it was an amazing exercise to go through, because not only do we recognise and value the amazing work that goes on in our regions, where our regions are the main ones that deliver, but we also engage with so many amazing union reps and others. So these are the overarching principles that will govern the college. I'm moving on quickly because of time. So what's happened so far? Well, integral to all that we are doing is our organising, campaigning, bargaining and negotiating agenda in our work. I make no apologies that in providing member learning and supporting working people get access to opportunities, the ask from the union is that they give something back. We very strongly believe in being organised in the workplace. We know that education will empower members. They will commit a loyalty to the union. And we do hope that we will grow out activists from what we're doing on the member learning side. So notwithstanding that, we've invested a lot of work so far in supporting our activists and our union staff to understand and embed the Unison College in all that we do. We have inevitably had to look at new systems. We will be launching a new branding, a new logo shortly. We will have one clear identity. We will dedicate more resources, both financially and staffing, to support the expansion of our member learning and activist education programmes.
2 minutes.
We have already expanded our CPD. And we will continue to do so. And members and activists will be offered, this is a new area for us, new opportunities to undertake accredited and gain qualifications. Most of that work we will do with our partners in the FE sector, and trade union education will remain a vital part. Wherever colleges provide trade union education, we will be working with that college. We are also working into other areas like piloting the learning curve, a personalised advice and guidance career service for our members. This is a new area for us, but I think those of us who've been around long enough will know that one of the big problems many members face is they do not get access to proper career development as a working adult. It's a nightmare for them trying to find their way through the plethora of educational opportunities. What we do know from the survey that we undertook recently with IFF, with 18,000 responses, is that large numbers of our members want to progress in their career but don't know how to. They want to, in many cases, find a new job, but they don't know how to. They want to participate in education, but again, they don't know how or where to go. And what we're hoping to do is to bring in a holistic approach to our member learning programs that starts with that, being able to advise and support members to them becoming a fully fledged activist. Just very quickly, because one thing in talking about IAG and careers service that we want to provide our members, it in no way does it undervalue the absolutely invaluable role of union learning reps and our staff in the regions that deliver the education programs. So we are going to be launching shortly a campaign to recruit an army of union learning reps. We are going to be delivering and developing further work with colleges in partnership between all levels of the union. And we want to learn from the pilots that we're currently doing. And we also want to be entering now into focusing on developing a much more flexible and responsive programme to develop and train our activists. And we'll continue to work with our current partners and indeed new partners in order to provide what we believe is the education and the opportunities that our members and our activists not just deserve, but actually need and want. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teresa. That's really interesting. That's really interesting and helpful.
I think I missed out half of what I want to say, but never mind. Thank you all.
Well, it leaves much more for you to contribute at the future event. John, could we move forward to you and John Lloyd? You're muted at the moment, John.
Yeah, not anymore. I'm not. I think. Oh. I hope. Yeah. Okay. Good. Right. Well, my first advantage over the previous speakers is that I'm the history bit to their policy. So I'm going to go back in time to a lyrical sunlit upland at the dawn of residential trade union training in 1953. And I shall be speaking, I hope, tonight to a good handful of old friends and, of course, try and interest some of the younger people who have to carry this flag forward. My name's John Lloyd, and I was the education officer of the Electrical, Electronic, Telecommunication and Plumbing Union from 1978 to 1992, and again from 1997 to 2002. I inherited a tradition created by world level, I mean, I'm saying it like Johnson now, world-beating trade union educationalists, John Vickers and Jock Haston, who went, of course, I see John Edmonds in the picture, who went across to the GMB and further distinguished himself before his sad early death. I've been asked to speak tonight about technical education for members, and in a small throwaway remark by our dear host, as an alternative, as a difference from members, from representatives' education and the trade union role of trade union education. We always saw technical education on specialist educational subjects as part of the armory for local reps to establish credibility with the members in the first place, to show that we cared about the very work they did. The second group, of course, we wanted to impress was the employers, because we needed to show the employers that in many cases, we understood their bloody business better than they did. And there was no better way to prove that than to demonstrate competence in technical training. And the third set of bodies that we were seeking respect and grudging admiration from were all the umpteen government bodies and further education and higher education bodies who had access to the funds for technical training that we didn't have completely within our own control. Now, this had a background that came out of being already interested in providing specialist services to members via their shop stewards in issues like health and safety. For instance, the lad who ran my safety courses for me, Adrian Cunningham, was the chair of the Piper Alpha inquiry's special advisor on all the people who came to give evidence to that inquiry. The fellow who did pensions at our place, Alan Pickering, is of course extremely well known even to this day as somebody who still makes contributions, I'm sure, to the development of pensions policy and understanding in the wider society. So we also learnt that expertise governing the ways our reps worked, if they could demonstrate to the employers these things, they would win negotiating respect at the same time. It was easier to get money off of Scottish and Newcastle breweries, for instance, when we were running their electronics training for them. It was easy to get Perkins engines to allow us to enter into lifelong learning agreements all across the Peterborough and Anglia area, simply because we taught them how to save energy through the electrical control systems that my colleague Lynn Williams was then responsible for helping people to understand. So because we had this, I don't want to use the word ideology because it wasn't an ideology, it seemed to us to be a sensible daily routine, that if we understood the workings of decent employers would treat us decently. And we had umpteen evidence to that effect. We started doing vocational electronics training at our residential college. And I know that nowadays people are slightly dismissive of the need for an actual place for people to go, although the strength of meetings education rather than online effort exclusively has been well made this evening by both previous speakers. We had two residential colleges, one at Esher, which largely did our trade union training, and the other at Cudham near Biggin Hill in South London, North Kent, where we did the vocational education. And to be able to mix up people's attendance at these buildings was absolutely crucial to demonstrating our commitment to negotiating influence via technical understanding. We then put the 8 technical training officers we had who didn't know the CWU from the XYZ, but they did know their electronics. We put the 8 of them in small vans, converted all 11 regional offices that were suitable from Scotland down to Plymouth, and let them go to the members out in the country. And that worked a treat as well, because if they could then get more and more ordinary members taking part in this, but within the union context, with the union reps always there to greet and meet all the ordinary members who came on the technical courses. So the link between the union's professional expertise on behalf of its members as professional people, technical people, qualified people, learning people, was desperately important. It also spread wider when we were able to use, in the later period of my experience, and I'm sure the experience of many people since, the extraordinary success of the Union Learning Fund in order to help us train our union learning reps to do what the previous speaker was saying so importantly, that to help people to know where to go was as important as anything that we were able to say to them on a particular event. I'm still reminded with a sense of smiling pleasure that when Peugeot Cars at Brighton wanted so much to do some union learning with illiteracy as a workplace-based problem, as they got more and more digital and as they got more and more paperwork around the tracks, we lent them our Union Learning Fund grant to pay for the 3 people from Coventry College who went into the works to do that all-important stuff to make sure everybody had the right literacy skills. So it was an attitude, a habit, an aspiration of our time that we thought it could apply to people with limited technical and professional experience, all the way through to the most sophisticated technical challenges that our members had to face. I'm so pleased to have heard that the TUC still tries hard to also do something that has always been difficult. Most unions, and mine was just famous for it, most unions are actually very precious about their own virtues and everybody else's inadequacies. And therefore, there was always a small suspicion that if you handed some of your best people to Tom Wilson, he might whisper some nonsense in their ears that we wouldn't want them to hear. And everybody had to be brought round by the skillful use of persuasion and a specialist understanding of our problems as education officers, that the TUC were able to bring people like myself and George Lawson and Frank Cosgrove and Les Nixon and Jim Sutherland and make us sit in the same room and talk about teaching methods and at long last learn from each other. So the TUC, as in many of its other functions, had this fantastic capacity to hold the coats while the rest of us did our duty by our members in learning from each other. And I'm sure that that's the sort of thing that they must continue to do in order to spread best practice throughout the movement, that as membership is not good enough now and never was, as membership struggle to make sense of the mad world that we all live in still. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. And thank you in particular for for keeping yourself precisely to time, indeed being slightly on the good side of timekeeping. We now have 3/4 of an hour for discussion. There's been a good number of issues coming up in the chat. One of the things that I have been encouraging is discussion about what we might discuss more in a conference. But I really want to open the discussion now to all comers from all directions, providing it's only one at a time. And who will kick us off? And bearing in mind that I can't necessarily see who is speaking, I think it would be helpful if you stuck your virtual hand as well as your physical hand up. I can see Tom Wilson's physical hand up, but I think that's the last honest personal hand I'm going to take up. So Tom Wilson first, then Michael Gold.
Thanks very much indeed, John, and thank you very much to all our speakers. It was very, very interesting. I'm just wondering about paid educational leave. And, you know, it's one of those things that's been around for all of trade union educational history, a long campaign to try and persuade governments to give paid leave, not just to reps, of course, we still have that in some sense, but also to just ordinary members. Many other countries around the world have some version of paid educational leave. And I suppose it's a subset of the bigger question. When we get a new Labour government, God willing, as soon as possible, what should we be asking them to do to help trade union education? And should paid educational leave be a big part of that shopping list?
Thank you. I saw Michael Gold's hand up, but it now seems to have disappeared. Michael.
No, you did see it up, John. I just loaded again. I've got a question for Kevin, probably, also for Teresa. Kevin, in your presentation, you said that 90% of reps are older white men in secure employment, often in the public sector. You also quite rightly pointed out that most workers are, or many workers are not in those categories. We have a very high percentage of workers, a growing percentage, who are in precarious employment. Obviously, part-time isn't actually precarious, but certainly fixed-term contracts, agency work, 0 hours contracts, all these forms of employment are on the up. Could I ask you to speculate on answering your own challenge? I mean, how do we reach this growing segment of the labour market, given the precarious nature of their employment? So it's just an open question to you and indeed for anybody else, because it's one that increasingly bothers me. Thank you very much.
Okay, what I think I'm going to do is take one more contribution and then go back to the see whether the speakers will contribute on it. So I see Carol with a yellow hand, and then we'll go to a broader discussion, and then maybe we'll turn to Janet. Carol.
Hi, yeah, Carol McGrath from Leeds Local Government Unison. My question is around, I think in the research that Unison did on the learning agenda, one of the issues that came back was that a lot of members had said that they weren't aware of the learning that Unison did. And I wondered if this is echoed in other unions. And from my own experience, I think that, for example, at branch meetings, at all meetings that I go to, including at national level, learning seems to be quite low on the agenda in terms of how unions organise and motivate their members. And for me, I think that's quite a shame, really. And what we can do to address this issue to make people realise that learning is the backbone of unions, and we need to really make sure that that message gets out.
Thank you. Shall we now turn to our speakers again to respond to the points that Tom, Michael and Carol have made, and in a sense perhaps to take things on, and then we'll turn to Janet and Tony and indeed John Edmonds, who have signalled, and others.
Who would you like to go first?
Well, Kevin, would you like to kick off? There were some points directed at you.
Yeah, sure, happy to, John. Thanks for the questions. I mean, I think to Michael's point, I mean, I would say our unions are reaching into those workplaces. You may have seen GMB's agreement with Deliveroo recently, and earlier than that, an arrangement with Uber. The biggest growing section in our biggest growing membership in the BEC2 section of Prospect is is precarious workers, self-employed workers. So our unions are reaching into those areas. Of course, we're also campaigning to put an end to those precarious conditions that people are enduring, and for all kinds of reasons, and not least of which is it's much harder for people to to have a decent quality of life, but it's also much harder for them to have any kind of access to education, support, advice, and guidance that unions provide. So I think there is progress there. I don't think any of us are going to suggest that it's as much progress or as quick as we would like, but I think there have been some pretty significant kind of achievements that our trade unions have made in the last in the most recent period. So I'd be slightly more optimistic, I think, than the question would infer. I mean, to Tom's question, I think and Adrian Judd, I think, offered to share some research into barriers to learning, and I suspect it confirms what Teresa's survey said, what we know from talking to learners a lot in the last period. Time is a real barrier. Cost of learning is a real barrier. Access to good quality advice and guidance is a real barrier. And I think, as Teresa was indicating, helping people overcome a real confidence barrier is really important too. So, the direct question is, what should Labour do about it? Well, I'm, as Tom knows, involved in Labour's Skills Commission, so I've got a route in on this one and some skin on the game. But what I think Labour ought to commit to, and I suspect that they will, is a right to paid time off to learn, because that is absolutely critical to give people that time to learn. Reintroduction of a much better system of individual learning accounts to help learners and employers with costs around learning. A national careers advice and guidance service, because I think most of us, the last bit of careers advice we got was half an hour before we left school, and it should be universal, because people's careers don't stop when they start work, they continue and change throughout their working lives. And importantly, restoration of Union Learning Fund, because one of the things that we know has been the most effective, as other people have said, in terms of enable people to overcome some of those barriers, but critically to overcome the confidence barriers, is having a trusted person alongside you who can help you access learning. And I would be gobsmacked if that wasn't in Labour's promises moving forward.
Very much, Kevin. Teresa, do you have contribution here?
Well, I totally concur with what Kevin said, so I won't take up that. But I'll pick up on Carol's point about the low awareness amongst members and our Unison surveys. The 2019 one evidence, only 50% of members who responded sort of knew what Unison had done. Many members didn't realise we even offered the member learning programme, or they thought it was only for activists. And I suspect many unions have the same problem. And there'll be a host of reasons why. From our perspective, learning and organising, I suppose the clue is in the name really, we all have to work much harder. Reps are busy, members are busy, and we're absolutely convinced that if we can recruit more union learning reps, it will help spread the message. Like everybody, we've got a lot more to do with embedding and mainstreaming trade union member learning, sort of say, into every organiser's psyche, so that they're aware of it. So, and I think that's what the college will do. One of the things that we, I've struggled with is our offer is so vast, so varied. Our workplaces are so varied. And you saw we've got 160,000 workplaces, 40,000 employers. I wish to God we had a rep in, half of those employers, and it would, be able to pass the message, not just about learning, but also about organising, campaigning, and so on and so forth. So one of the things the college will do is by bringing everything together with one clear identity, even though delivery will continue in the region, but there'll be one clear identity and one clear offer that members and activists are aware of. I think that will help us, better promotion, but clearly organising and continuing to try and recruit and organise members, empower members, has got to be part of the solution, not the only solution. And I know Kevin probably won't need to repeat this, but some of the amazing studies that Union Learn have produced about the number of individuals that will join a union after participating in a union-led activity, i.e. this is where the Union Learning Fund comes in, because it did give us greater reach and greater engagement with potentially a number of employers where all of us weren't necessarily organised. So I think the answer, Carol, is we need more union reps. We need to get member learning higher up on the agenda, and we need to just convince more people about the benefits that member learning can bring to help recruit, grow and develop and empower members.
Thank you. John, do you want to come in on this?
Very briefly, and trying as hard as I can, not just to repeat the good sense that's already been spoken. But paid educational leave was mentioned by Tom in his question, and it is and it ought to be more of a negotiating responsibility for local officials, never mind about shop stewards and workplace representatives, because paid educational leave opens so many doors to our members' independent access to advice and understanding of things that go on in their workplace and workplaces in general. I imagine that also the problem of the insecure workforce, gig workers and so on, is but a modern repetition of an almost perpetual problem. People have tried since time began to make trade unionism attractive to self-employed workers. And that's a particular difficulty for so many unions, because now the only thing that a lot of skilled and professional and important people can do if an employer buggers them around is say, well, sod you, I've got plenty of skills, mate, I'm off ski, I'll go and work somewhere else. And although that might just suit the individuals concerned, it of course further undermines the perpetual inability to organise anti-union workplaces, even amongst skilled and professional people. There.
Thank you, thank you. I think we're getting a really interesting contribution or discussion going here. One of the things I would just throw in again, I've stated in the chat, is one of the ideas that we have is that this is leading up to a bigger conference, so we can go into things more intensely. And so if you can begin to develop in your thinking, in your contributions, ideas about what we might do in a conference, I think that might be really helpful. We don't have any set agenda at this point. A lot of points that have been coming up in the chat, and they've been very useful. They are. Janet Newsham.
Hello. So I just wanted to, well, I suppose to support the view about TEC education, and that that broad, suppose look at and support that you get from that, that raising confidence, because it's with different trade unions together that people start to realise that they're part of something a lot broader, a lot bigger, that they need to participate. And I think that's really invaluable that brings to it. But I think also, when I got into the trade union, I got in through weekend schools, and they weren't trade union reps; they were members going to weekend schools. And I was I didn't come from a political background or anything, but it gave me an opportunity to see and to develop, and then to go back to my workplace and become a rep, and then get the training. So I think that whole lot of has gone from trade union education. I'd like to know really which trade unions are still doing weekend schools, political weekend schools. Are they valuing that as part of the education package that we can use to develop? And also, it would give us opportunities to do more around issues that are coming up, to be more responsive to issues. Like Black Lives Matters. There's lots of young people involved in that. Why are we not responding to that better? you know, instead of, you know, formalizing and, you know, being more structured, but, you know, giving people the opportunity to develop and then get involved in the trade union movement.
Thank you very much. Let's move on to Tony Howell, and then we'll have John Edmonds, if we may, and then perhaps we'll see whether there are any. We'll generalise a bit back to the contributors. Tony.
Hi. Thank you very much. Tony Howell. I'm a TEC tutor at City College in Southampton. This has been really interesting and fantastic, Teresa's presentation. What I'd like to say, and I don't know if it's well known or widely known, but the TEC department in Southampton City College is closing on the 31st of this month. So the tutors have been made redundant, and it leaves the south of England without a TEC education centre. So I really do understand what everyone's saying about, you know, getting learners back in the classroom and the rest of it. But the danger is, if we do not, Southampton City College will not be the only TEC centre that closes, will it? I understand what you're saying earlier about the TEC want to maintain the FE base, but for us in the City College, nothing really happened. In my humble opinion, I think we were kind of just left out to fade away. And I'm not sounding like a bitter tutor, but it's just really is a warning that if we don't put the message out to our reps, to our members, this will carry on. As we know, there's this filthy government is no lover of education for the working class, which is what we do, isn't it? So I just really want to say, and I think what Carol was saying as well was a very valuable contribution. So just really want to say to everyone, I would really welcome a conference as well. And I just think that we really need to get our members, you know, our reps, organisers, area organisers, regional organisers, really to understand the importance of education. We all obviously understand it, but I'm not sure if the wider union movement do. I really don't know. But thank you anyway. Cheers.
Thank you, Tony. And that's a nasty bit of news you've transmitted, and I'm sure that we can. Well, we'll get comments from Kevin perhaps in a few minutes. John Edmonds.
Well, thanks, John. You were helpful in referring to the fact that we're looking to arrange a full-scale conference on this issue in a few months' time. And at that conference, I hope we can go more deeply into the question of what is the purpose of trade union trading, which has been a subject of argument, controversy, and sometimes ribald debate through the history that John Lloyd talked about. And I wonder whether we might, during that discussion, start from a slightly different point. Traditionally, the discussion has been, should trade unions concentrate on training for shop stewards and local organisers? Should they concentrate on organising methods and collective bargaining? And how far should they go into professional training, career training, and so on? Perhaps it might be useful to start from a different point. As Kevin so rightly said, when someone gets the job of being a local representative, what they need, first of all, is support, and they need confidence. And perhaps we can look at this from the other end and say, okay, what sort of training is most likely to produce confidence in local representatives, not only in representing their members to the employer, but generally in portraying the trade unions in a positive light. So perhaps not just vocational versus organising training. Let's think about what the rep needs, and what the rep needs most of all, apart from information, is confidence. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John. Shall we go back to our main speakers and just see how they want to respond to those? Not requiring you to respond, but you know, if you have anything to contribute, well, you know what I mean.
I mean, just very quickly, John. I mean, I think, you know, I think I said in my opening remarks, you know, the message that we said to our trade unions around trade union provision is you use it or you lose it. Now, it's a 20-year trend down in participation for all kinds of reasons. Now, that's happening at the same time as our trade unions are saying to us very directly, we really value trade union education. We really value the kind of trade union tutors, and we really value the FE base from our provision. I couldn't disagree with those comments, but the reality is we've seen a 20-year decline in people going into classroom-based provision, and you know, Southampton College is the latest in actually a long line of centres that have regrettably closed because, you know, FE colleges balance the books, they count the numbers, they don't get the returns from trade union education that they used to. It's a really sad reality, but you know, if people don't turn up at college courses, then those college courses are going to stop being run, and it is a really tragic thing. But it does pose that challenge that I think Janet spoke to. Well, how do we bring, and John spoke to them, about how do we bring reps together to get the things that they're now missing out from, that lack of FE-based provision? How do we build that solidarity? How do we share those experiences? How do we build that confidence? And it's a big challenge for us because there are thousands and thousands of new reps every year who need that kind of support from each other, who need that confidence building, who need that solidarity. One, you know, I think positive thing to say, and it you know, it feels like a bit of a tear in a salty sea, a bit of a drop in the ocean, but we are running a Black Leaders programme in Bristol that is based on residential participation. That you know, is designed by the people participating in the course. We've said to them, what is it you want, what is it you need, and design the course around them. I think we'll learn a lot from that programme. You know, and you know, some of it will be a bit tough for us to hear, I think, but you know, it's really important that we absolutely listen to the people that we're proclaiming to support.
Thank you, Kevin. Teresa or John?
Can I just add a
Teresa.
Thank you. Can I just add a few comments? Well, firstly, Tony, obviously, really disappointed to hear that. I was told by the Unison Education Officer, the Regional Education Officer the other week, that Southampton's closing, and I think it is a great loss. But that being said, and in light of what Kevin said, we have found ourselves in this very difficult position in Unison over recent years, and I'm not going to hide from it. And on the one hand, we've had to ramp up massively our own internal ability to deliver. And on the other hand, we've kept this balancing act of trying to make sure that we continued wherever possible to work with the TU Ed units for them to provide particularly our core courses. On the other side of this, we've then got a problem that a lot of the TU Ed units weren't able to deliver some of the training that we were wanting. So Kevin mentioned leadership. We've now started to develop our own leadership program, and it links back, I think it was Karen who said about having residential courses and about political education and so on and so forth. Well, it's a right old mix, whether some of that goes on in our regions, some it does, some it doesn't. But one thing we are determined to do is political education, and being enabling to bring members together, whether it's to educate on women's history. We used to run a great programme in the South East on a women's history course, young people and politicising them. All these kind of training events have a role to play to make sure that we can keep the knowledge and the spirit and the fight of trade unions alive in other individuals and bring forward new activists. But the problem we do keep having, and I don't know what the answer is, and I do welcome the opportunity to say, what is the future of trade union education provided by FA? I think sometimes I've gone to trade union education units and they would want to bend over backwards to try and accommodate us, but then they're restricted by other elements within the college. Some of that I don't understand why. So it isn't an easy answer, but I do think it's important to fight to retain TU education delivered under the auspices of that kind of TUC umbrella, because it certainly is important for smaller unions. You see, I am very conscious, I can sit here and I'm very well aware that I belong, and I'm very lucky and privileged to work for the largest union in the UK that is able to dedicate resources. I've always offered that hand and we have done during the pandemic, to support other smaller unions. But what I do really seriously worry about, if TU Ed continues to wither on the vine the way it is, I despair for those smaller unions. So apart from, I think we need it still in Unison. I certainly would welcome a discussion at a later date about how can we support trade union education, taking on board everything that's Kevin said. We have got to reflect how people want to actually receive training these days.
John, do you want to come in at this point?
Can I just very briefly to add what emphasis I can to what John Edmonds said. When I did a monthly introductory shop stewards course for all those years, I used to start first thing in the first session by saying, now I know what you've all been through. Some of you have had a closely fought democratic experience where that twerp at the back of the meeting is always telling you you're a complete idiot, but you spoke in the canteen and you got some really strong support, and by 10 votes to 8, you overthrew the fool, and now you're the shop steward after all that. That's you, isn't it? Or perhaps just some of you, in that long silence after the previous bloke left, said, oh, sod it, I'll do it. And everybody thanked you greatly for putting your hand up and doing it. And I found 9 out of 10 of every introductory stewards course had been a sod it, all right, I'll do it, without any awareness of the implications, let alone wider outside the factory implications. And so that question of new shop steward confidence is absolutely central to persuading people not only to do the steward's job in that place, that time well, but to go on into the union deeper and deeper and deeper to conferences and committees and all the rest of it, that alone makes the union a live organization.
Thank you very much. Now, I can see I've got 3 yellow hands, and I can see that Ian Stewart has been holding up a real hand. Is that a real hand where you're really trying to come in, Ian? Right, okay. Shall we take, in that case, we've got 4 people who would like to contribute. We have about 15 minutes left. So why don't we take those 4 contributions, that is from Karen Brooks, Kevin Flanagan, Stephen Craig and Ian Stewart, and then we'll go back to our main speakers and give them a chance to wash up in response to those contributions. So to begin with, perhaps Karen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah, a couple of things. Southampton is a huge loss, and I think a lot of TU Ed departments are restricted in terms of kind of college funding, bums on seats, those kinds of things. Whether enough work has been done to bridge that gap between TUC and college is another story completely. I think Teresa's right about reps not knowing what we do and not knowing the offers are out there, and that's a definite job for most trade unions, I think. I would be appalled if a Labour government didn't bring back some kind of union learning fund, to be honest. But then at the beginning of the union learning fund, unions were told you have to bring this all in-house. Hardly any of them did. Some of the bigger unions did, hardly any of them did. And of course, then once we lost ULF funding, we were kind of floundering around trying to fund these things ourselves. We have seen a drop-off in online learning as people have gone back into the classroom, as staff have gone back into the classroom to teach and members have gone back into the classroom to teach. We do have really, really good success with a CPD programme, which I won't say too much about because our CPD programme leader is on this call somewhere. But those are delivered mostly online, much, much shorter, and they start to address Janet's point about political education. So part of that remit is they are delivered to members and they are in direct line with our bargaining agenda, but from a broader aspect. So we would do things like decolonising the curriculum. We will do stuff around a Green New Deal aimed at members. And I think because they're much shorter, we get much more traction online. Our longer core courses online are really struggling. And I think what we'll end up with is a hybrid where we have some courses online, some courses that are true hybrid, and some courses in the classroom. I think we do need somewhere along the line to acknowledge the loss of TU Ed centres and look at how we fund, look at the funding for quals. We're just about to lose level T2s. That will have a massive impact, particularly for some of the smaller unions that Teresa is talking about. And we've kind of gone round in circles, really, and I wouldn't want to go back, and I don't think we would as a union want to go back. So we started many, many years ago with no kind of professional involvement in education, with any Tom, Dick and Harriet teaching people. Then we moved to a much more professional, structured way through quals. So what we ended up then with stuff going through colleges, I would be appalled if we took stuff out of colleges. These are the education professionals. We can all deliver our own stuff and, you know, we all have to. But if we don't keep that professionalism of college, what we'll end up with is kind of back where we were, you know, 40 years ago, with somebody telling a story to a group of reps for days and days on end and not actually addressing any of the significant learning that kind of should be done in a classroom. And we wouldn't be able to track those people through those courses that we run. So I would be fighting tooth and nail to keep education somewhere in FE, and certainly within professionally taught structures. I'm going to shut up now because that sounded like a bit of a soapbox. It didn't mean to. It was just a whole kind of stream of consciousness. Thanks,
Karen. Kevin Flanagan.
Thank you, John. I've spent my life doing this. I was a product of trade union education myself, and I've attempted to keep that line going in terms of how important it was to me as an individual coming out of Old Trafford into education. And one of the elephants in the room is the very point that was just made a few minutes ago. And I'm delighted to see Teresa on the call and the excellent ideas behind the college, because one of the key issues has, despite all years of Union Learning Fund, we failed to address sustainability. We failed to build an infrastructure inside the trade union movement to help sustain the delivery mechanisms for trade union and working class education. And therefore, that's one of the things we need to be alert to and to continue to try and work with. And I think increasingly in this debate, there has to be still that model of engagement with the community. I started a simple project 43 years ago, and we're still drawing in 100 to 300 people a year on community education, functional skills, basic IT, English and maths, because those are the significant barriers that people are having to overcome to get to the first hurdle of even involvement in trade unions. And I think, you know, that we need to, especially as somebody who has seen, as you all have, the massive attack on FE funding, the massive attack on trade union funding. Sadly, I'm the one who had to live through the agony of Ruskin and what was going on there. You know, we've seen a sustainable attack on working class education in many different forms. We also know, And we see that some of the trajectory that we're talking about and the lack of investment in education training, the lack of take-up, employers themselves have significantly reduced the amount of training that they're investing in. COVID has added to that decline that hasn't been there just for 1 year, it's been there for the last 15. And we need to take that seriously. And I suppose the ultimate question here is, we need to find the new models of delivery of working class education that are not just the dependency model on what the government's doing. If I go to my colleagues in Germany, if I go to my colleagues in Belgium, they have trade union institutions that are controlled and run by the trade unions and other partners in delivering a wide range of trade union education and in the community. And it's that challenge I think we need to pick up and face, and how we engage community and other social partners in that debate. And I leave it at that, Chair. I'm conscious of your time.
Thank you, Kevin. Stephen Craig.
Hi, thanks, John. Evening, colleagues. Yeah, a couple of observations, I suppose. And this is a little bit like sort of Back to the Future. In addressing what we're talking about, there's a fine line between vision and hallucination. And we can talk about history in a sort of rose-tinted glasses way, but we can also look at keeping what was good in that historical and traditional perspective. We codified and were seen as greater social partners in the past, I recognize that, but we were able to codify them bargain around learning, training and skills. And I think we need to just sort of step back and look at identifying that worked in the past and why it worked, and then telescope that forward into the new environment, because many of those tools and techniques are still relevant today as they were then. I think, yeah, we've got to challenge ourselves in relation to moving outside of our comfort zones and being more transformative. And I think effectively we need very much, particularly when we're looking at crowdsourcing our approach with Labour Party or with whatever government's in power, we need to be consistent, coherent and coordinate in our approach. I think central to this is the massive disconnect between our industrial, political, skills and education strategies. And in what we're talking about, there's an art in the alchemy here. And we've got a vacuum of a lived experience of what works in many of our political leaders. You've only got to look at Gavin Williamson's performance in education to identify that he simply didn't have a clue about what he was doing, nor about training, vocational education and technical vocational education and training. And I think we need to find the synergies across what we're talking about so that we consolidate our ask in a very clear and dynamic way, because I think otherwise it's an art of management to make the learning and skills landscape difficult for people to navigate. So I'd suppose it's easy for us to keep it human by letting our people know, and the families of our people, that if they want to see their sons and daughters in jobs in the new world, then dealing with issues like just transition, the green agenda, net zero apprenticeships, if government and particularly employers are receiving public money, they should be immediately mandated to invest in skills, because unfortunately that's the trick that's being played on them at the moment, and they don't recognize it, particularly because of the influence of the media. I'll close on this. The next conference, look at models of delivery, not just a reflection of the past and not a discussion about the future, but practical, tangible tools and techniques that we can give both our reps and our political leaders to do the job going forward. Because if we don't, we will be lost in the ether around the discussions about different things. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And that takes us finally to Ian Stewart, before we return to our original contributors. Ian. And you need to unmute yourself. You're muted. No, you need to unmute yourself. Can we go up?
Right, you've got you. Right. Thank you. Good evening, comrades. It's great to see John Edmonds because it leads in the main. I want to talk in the short time I've got about the role of the trade unions in the Labour Party and trade union education in particular in the Labour Party and in the community. But before I move on to that, I really, really regret the demise of the period where John, as a key player, and other trade union leaders had a good, sensible, calming influence on the nonsense that has always gone on within the Labour Party. I sadly regret that that role doesn't appear to be being played or acknowledged within the Labour Party currently. Nevertheless, we struggle. In relation to trade unions, Labour Party and community, first, I have another elephant in the room, Stephen, and that is the role and activism of anti-democratic factions. It is pervasive and it's pernicious. For example, when I became the elected mayor, the first elected mayor of Salford, I offered the trade unions the full national living wage for every low-paid worker and apprentices, trade union youth policy, no blacklisting, and so on. And I offered the role of running the training system within the council to the trade unions in partnership with the training team, the staff training team. That was turned down, and it was turned down bluntly, and I would never say this publicly, but it was turned down bluntly because of anti-democratic activists within the trade union movement. For another time. However, I went to my constituency meeting last night and I asked how many trade union delegates were in the room. There were three of us only. That is historically a low that I've never seen in my constituency in the last 58 years. I can't believe that whilst I think Stephen had a point, the trade union movement still has facilities. And I found myself so upset that I got myself elected as the political education and training officer at 72 years of age. Not a healthy situation, but I intend to work with our trade unions to make use of their facilities, not only in making use of their facilities for Labour Party members, but to regenerate, to help regenerate the healthier links and involvement and engagement between the Labour Party, its membership, and the trade unions. I really do think that whilst there's lots of other very important issues that have been raised tonight, there are plenty of people that are doing that adequately. One area I think it's really remiss of us not to be paying attention to is actually, in contrast to Stephen's perspective about the future, I don't see how we can move to the future without understanding where we've come from in the past. For example, nobody in the TUC can tell you what the history of where the concept of trade union learning reps came from. It arose out of the 2003 Act, but it was trade unions that were able to influence the Blair government at the time that managed to get all the points that were being made earlier about the Union Learning Fund and trade union learning reps and so on into legislation. To do that, we have to acknowledge our own experience and expertise. And what's remiss of people like me is we never wrote down what we were involved in or how we helped to move things on in the past. we must generate through the TUC and union and other trade union education bodies an understanding within our membership that they should write down, they should record what they've done so that we can all learn from it. So I'll keep my comments that short. If anybody's interested in the history of trade union learning in the workplace and through, for example, a social partnership model that we developed here in the UK, a trade union-led social partnership model, please contact me at my generic email address that's on the chat. Great conference, very, very well done.
Thank you very much, Ian. We have, as you might expect, overrun our time. So I wonder whether I can turn to very quick responses to the contributions from John, Kevin and Teresa.
Sure. Thank you, John. I mean, thank you for the conversation. I think it's been really, genuinely, really kind of great quality. I mean, I think just, I guess, 3 comments on the last set of speakers. I think we do learn from the past, but it's important we don't cling to it. I think, as you know, Steve's point of, you know, understanding what works, understanding what applies now, it has to inform the kind of challenge from Karen to have that debate around what the future of trade union education looks like, because we're in an incredibly, I mean, I'm going to say this, and because I always say something to upset Tom, we're in an incredibly different world now to when Tom was in the job that I do now. Incredibly different, and it's just been a few years. So it's important that we kind of reflect the reality of the world that we're in, as well as understanding the knowledge and experience has got us to the place that we're in now. I absolutely, you know, I agree with Kevin's point. Though this is an attack on class, and if anybody hasn't spotted that that we're enduring an attack on our class, then where have you been for the last 10 years? Because it's kind of obvious to everybody, and you know, the manifestation of that in training and in skills is we're now enduring the lowest levels of state investment in history, the lowest levels of employer investment in history, and the lowest levels of participation in history. That's the achievement that this war on our working class has got us. So that, you know, I think the message from Kevin and Steve and Karen and indeed from Ian is we need to kind of wake up to that reality and actually, you know, be a little bit more bold, a little bit more challenging, and a little bit more imaginative in how we respond to that. And I think that's a fair challenge that we've all got to respond to.
Okay, thank you very much, Kevin. I'm going to move on to John and to Teresa and ask you to be brief, if I could, only because we're already past our closing time, as it were.
Yeah. Shall I start then very quickly? I'm aware that it's corpse out time, and the ladies' football is just starting as well, which is important to me. Can we have our history of policy conferences on any day except Saturdays? Because some of us are a bit busy Saturday afternoons as we're, you know, elsewhere engaged. That's for the future. But as for today's conference, absolutely splendid to come out of retirement all this time. And the best point I take away from it is Stephen Craig's point about consolidating our ask. And this is the role for the TUC to make sure that the big unions don't just do what they think they must do for their own people, a role I took on very strongly when I did this sort of work, but to consolidate the ask of all of us to make the next Labour government do their duty.
Thank you, John. Teresa.
Okay, very quickly. I do think trade unions have a responsibility and a duty to remember that if we weren't here to speak up for working class people, whether they're in employment or not, who else will do it? And Kevin, you set that scenario about what the state of the skills investment is at the moment, and all the points that have been raised by Stephen and others, totally concur with. I do think we should never forget our past, and we have got to learn from it, particularly in the remembering that we are the voice of working class people. and we've got a responsibility, and it's incumbent on us to support them access education. That's one of the founding reasons why we started off as trade unionists. But equally, we have got to modernise. Amongst other reasons why we're doing that college is because our General Secretary so firmly and strongly believes that Unison can help low-paid, mainly women workers. We've waited for decades and decades. They still have crap pay. They're treated like crap. Look how our members are being thought. Look how they were treated in the health service. Look how care workers, and many of you on this call will recognise it. If we don't look after our members, no one else is going to. And one of the ways that we can help improve people's lives is providing trade union education to them and trade union education to our activists, giving them the skills and the needs and the knowledge that they need. And similar, there is nothing wrong with us enabling working class people to get a foot on the ladder to educate them, to help improve their life chances, help improve their job prospects, earn more money. And I think that should be something we're really proud to do.
Thank you very much, Teresa. I'm now going to wrap things up with thanks to everybody. I think it's been a really interesting and flourishing conversation. I think we've got a lot of food for thought about what we might do in a conference in the new year. There's a lot in the chat too, which we should be able to take advantage of. Could I thank the three speakers, Teresa, John and Kevin. I'd also like to thank people in the background. I know Michael Gold, who contacted me originally about this, Tom Wilson in particular, who's been a real kind of eminence grise, or you know, the hand behind the throne, who has made this whole thing happen and thought through a lot of the content and contributions. And thank you all for taking part in and contributing and making a really fascinating conference. And I hope to see you all in person in the new year.